How did a wedding turn into an emotional disaster? My best friend's wedding turned into the most emotional disaster I've ever witnessed, and it started because of a single empty chair. I was one of the bridesmaids, so I'd been awake since 5 in the morning running around with curling irons, makeup kits, and enough caffeine to medically concern a doctor. Everything was perfect. The venue looked like something out of a movie. The bride was glowing. The groom couldn't stop smiling. People were crying before the ceremony had even started. There was just one weird thing. Right in the front row sat an empty chair with a small white envelope resting on it. Nobody touched it. Nobody explained it. I assumed it was reserved for a relative who was running late. The ceremony began. The bride walked down the aisle, and half the guests immediately started tearing up. Then, just before the vows, the officiant stopped. He looked toward the empty chair. Then he looked at the bride. Before we continue, he said, "There's something the bride would like to share." The room went completely silent. The bride took the microphone. Her hands were shaking. She pointed at the empty chair. "That seat belongs to my dad." Instantly, the mood changed. Her father had died 3 years earlier. Everyone knew that. A few guests were already wiping their eyes. Then she held up the envelope. "My dad wrote this letter before he passed away. He told me not to open it until my wedding day." You could have heard a pin drop. The bride unfolded the letter and started reading. The first part was exactly what you'd expect. How proud he was. How much he loved her. How he wished he could be there. People were crying everywhere. Then she suddenly stopped reading. Her face went pale. At first, I thought she was overwhelmed. Then I realized she was staring at someone. The groom. The entire room turned toward him. The guy looked confused. Then the bride continued reading. "My daughter, if you're reading this, then I wasn't around long enough to tell you something important. The young man you're marrying deserves to know the truth." The groom's smile disappeared. The room froze. The bride's voice started trembling. Apparently, years before his death, her father had been involved in a car accident. A minor accident. Nobody was hurt. Or so he thought. Months later, he discovered the other driver had lost control trying to avoid him. That driver died. The driver was the groom's father. The groom looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The bride kept reading. Her father had spent years carrying the guilt. When he learned his daughter was dating the man's son, he wanted to confess. But he was terrified it would destroy both families. So he wrote everything in a letter and left the decision to her. By now, people were openly sobbing. The bride folded the paper and looked at her fiancé. The poor guy looked completely shattered. For a second, I genuinely thought the wedding was over. Then the bride walked across the stage and handed him the letter. The groom read it. The entire venue waited. 30 seconds felt like 30 years. Finally, he looked up. There were tears running down his face. Then he said something I'll never forget. "My dad died because of an accident." He paused. "But I almost lost the love of my life because of a secret." The bride started crying. The groom took her hand. Then he looked at the empty chair and said, "I think you'd be happy we stayed." Half the guests completely lost it. The officiant was crying. The bride was crying. The groom was crying. Even the photographer was wiping tears off his camera lens. They finished the ceremony 10 minutes later, but nobody cared about the flowers, the food, or the decorations anymore.